So before I get started, just so I understand, like the audience, how many developers are in the group? Okay, pretty much most everybody. What languages do you guys use primarily? Python. You going to PyCon? You going to PyCon in a couple of weeks? All right, cool. Come check me out. Yep. Yeah. Okay, cool. What else? Java, PHP, Scala. Okay, that's cool. All right. So tonight I am going to show kind of a full stack application that I wrote a couple weeks ago called Beer Shift. It is actually a social beer drinking application. And I wrote it because I was going to Brussels, Belgium, a couple weeks ago. And they're famous for their beer. And so as I was out drinking, I wanted to know what it actually was that I was drinking. So I wrote a quick little application for my mobile phone. And it's Mongo backend, and it's actually a PHP code igniter on the backend for REST-based web services. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'll walk you through the code, show you the code. You can ask questions, whatever else. So I am Grant Shipley. I'm a developer evangelist on the OpenShift team at Red Hat. OpenShift is actually a platform as a service, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And you can follow me on Twitter if you want, or not. Okay, so in order for this to make sense, I'm going to give a couple of quick background slides, and I am not a slide guy. So we'll fly through these and actually start looking at code and start doing some command line stuff. So has anyone heard of Titanium Studio? Wow, okay, more than normal. Phone gap for those that haven't heard of Titanium Studio. Okay, so tonight I'm actually going to be showing Titanium Studio. Titanium Studio is actually the IDE that you can use in order to develop mobile applications in JavaScript. They do have an SDK called Titanium that is open source. If you don't want to use an IDE and you want to use, VI or whatever, you can just compile down at the SDK level as well. So it is an Eclipse-based IDE. They actually bought Aptana, I think, is what it originally came from. So you can build, test, and deploy mobile apps from inside the IDE. And that's why I'm using the MacBook tonight. I hate Apple, but in order to do iPhone stuff, you have to have a Mac laptop. But this will work if you're just targeting Android. If you're running Linux or Windows or whatever, you can just target Android devices on those platforms. You can use it to develop your mobile apps. You can also use it to develop PHP, Rails, Ruby. Pretty much if there's an Eclipse plugin for that language, it'll work inside of Titanium Studio. Has integrated Git, Code Assist, and one of the cool things is an actual debugger, which is better, in my opinion, than the Xcode debugger. You can set breakpoints and actually debug your apps on the native device as well. And then it has a built-in terminal if you want to look at logs and whatnot, and it's actually backed by the company Accelerator, who owns Titanium. It is free. The SDK is open source. You can use it. The way they actually make their money, though, that you'll need to be aware of if this is something you look at doing, is they have their own app store, kind of. You can buy modules, pre-built code. Like if you want to do barcode scanning in your app, instead of figuring out how to write it, you can pay like $5 a month and just download a module and do a couple lines and you'll have it in your code. And so that's how they're making money on this. So other topic, before we pull all this together, is a platform as a service. Has anyone actually heard of a platform as a service? Raise your hand. You guys are kidding me. Normally it's like one person raises their hand, so this is awesome. So real quick, a platform as a service just sits on top of an infrastructure as a service. So if you don't want to do all of the awesome command line foo that we saw a few minutes ago, in order to stand up your applications, you would use a platform as a service, which abstracts the infrastructure as a service layer from you. Okay? So OpenShift, which we're going to be using tonight for the back end of this application, is Red Hat's platform as a service. And it's backed actually on EC2 is what we use as our infrastructure as a service on the back end. So what's great about OpenShift is it's fast. We'll see that. It's completely free. It's easy to use, and it's scalable. So to create an application, you basically just use a command line tool. It's RHC, which stands for Red Hat Client Tools, I guess. Is that right? Red Hat Cloud. Mike's here as well. He's one of the core developers on the team. Yeah. So you just pass in an app name and your language of choice. We support Perl, Python, Ruby, PHP, Java, pretty much anything that's out there we support. And like I said, most important, it is free, as in beer, to use. You can have up to 5 application instances today of your language of choice or your database of choice. We support Mongo 2.0, MySQL, and Postgres, and SQLite, obviously, is just a file. But yeah, you can use that as well. So we support pretty much any language and any framework that sits on top of that language: PHP, CodeIgniter, Symfony, Zend, Cake, PHP, Ruby, Rails, Groovy Grails, Java, Seam, Spring. You could probably even get struts deployed out there if you wanted to. Haven't actually tried that as well. Python, we have Django. Pretty much any framework you want to use as you're developing your applications. So one of the things we wanted to keep in mind when we were developing OpenShift was to make it as non-proprietary as possible and to let you work how you want to work as a developer. Some developers live in IDE land. They want to do everything in the IDE, so we have Eclipse plugins that will allow you to create instances and deploy your code out to the cloud. We have a REST API. If you want to automate some systems creations and things like that in your own code, you can do that. We have command line tools that are written in Ruby, actually. And so because of that, out of the box, we support OS X, we support Linux, pretty much any flavor, and Windows. If you do use Windows, which I see a couple of laptops, so I think I saw Linux on them all. But if you do use Windows, you just need Cygwin in order to get some of the dependencies that we require in order to interact with OpenShift. But once you have Ruby and Gem, you just do gem install RHC, and they'll pull down the client tools, and you can start working at that point. So MongoDB on OpenShift, you can have 5 free instances. We have Mongo 2.0. You can do log telling. You can do snapshots of your application. And it'll take a complete snapshot, including your source code, and packages up in a tar.gz file so you can re-import it later or move to a different platform as a service as you want to. That's one of the great things about OpenShift and Red Hat is we do not have any proprietary APIs at all. So if you have Google App Engine, they have their own data store that you can use, or Amazon, we were just talking about their new database. So your code is no longer portable in a lot of these platforms as a service, and we wanted to make sure that your code is portable to any other platform as a service, or if you want to bring it back in-house. It's your code, and so that's one of the key tenets we kept in mind. We do have Rock Mongo support, which is, if you're not familiar with that, it's almost like PHP MyAdmin to administer MySQL databases. It's a web front end to administer and manage your Mongo databases. We also allow you to use Mongo Shell. You can SSH into these boxes, which is a key differentiator from OpenShift. We'll let you SSH, run Mongo Shell, do whatever you need to do at that point. And we have MMS support, so you can have the Mongo management stuff that 10GM provides. So we hook directly into that, so you can monitor your databases as well. So again, we're almost done with the slides. It is completely free. The only thing we ask for when you sign up is your email address. We don't ask for your first name, your last name, your kids' names, your dog's names, your address, anything like that. It's just your email address and a password. We do have a promo code field on there. I created one today called Shy MongoDB. If you actually sign up and deploy an app out there, I assume one of our spam bots is going to hit you and ask you if you want something and ask for your address at that point. But we have a bunch of OpenShift pint glasses that we can send out. Yeah? No, it's not. That's my attempt at cool camel leak casing, I guess. But yeah, so if you deploy an app, we'll send you an email if you want a pint glass or something like that, or a shirt or whatever. Just respond back and we'll send you one of those. Okay, so let's put it all together. I'll show you the app real quick. It's called Beer Shift. Let me exit out here. Start titanium. Uh-oh. Android simulator always gives me hassle. Why does it think I'm down? Yeah, I know, it's kind of weird. Yeah. Let's see if we can, there we go. I've had more trouble with the Android emulator. So I'll start the app on both the iPhone and the Android. So you can see it looks just like a native application. It does actually get compiled down to a natively running application. So we'll see the same code base on both platforms, and then I'll show you the application, then we'll actually go through the code and walk through how it's actually working. This is all REST-based, talking out to OpenShift on Amazon EC2. So it took me about, I'm guessing about 2.5 to 3 days to write this little application, including learning the Accelerator or Titanium APIs. And just as a side note, let me open up iTunes real quick here. I'll show you the first application I wrote as a mobile developer about 3 years ago. Let's see, what's it called? Signing Time. It's a pretty simple app. Let's see, these are all the songs. And here's one of the apps I wrote. So it's a pretty simple app. It just has tables and some background views. It doesn't do anything special. It took me about 2 months full time to write this little application, right? And why did it take so long? Because I have been a Java developer for over 10 years. Started doing PHP about 3 years ago. I haven't used C or C++ since college, a long time ago. And to learn Objective-C was a struggle for me after not thinking about memory management for a long time. I had memory leaks galore. I had to remember if you malloc, you have to dealloc. You know, you have to think about that. I also had to learn Xcode, their profiling tools, because you will have memory leaks if you code native for this. So I spent 2 months on this. I actually partnered with this company, Signing Time. They have like a Nickelodeon show to do this, and we have like a split revenue model here. But Android became really popular after this was released, and they kept wanting me to write an Android version of this. I wasn't going to do another, in 2 months, do an Android app in Java, and that's why something like Titanium or PhoneGap is pretty cool for applications like this. Are you going to develop a game? Probably not. I think they do have OpenGL bindings, but you're probably going to do native Objective-C at that point. Also, if you want to download the app I'm showing you, it is on the App Store. It's just called BeerShift, I think. Yep, so here it is. And the source code is available to this tonight. If you want to download it, play around with it, submit patches, fork it, create your own app, whatever. It's at github.com/gshipley. It's where you can get the source code for this. Okay, so let's look at the application real quick. So the first thing, when you start the app, if you don't have an existing user, it's going to drop you onto the settings screen where you can create a user. So I'm going to put in a bad password just to show you that. Come on, Android. With the same code base, the UI is, and it's hard to tell because of the lights in here, but it is native UI components. So what you would expect on the iPhone is this kind of ugly blue dialog box, and then what you would expect on the Android is actually what's shown with the same code. And then obviously, if the user doesn't exist, it's going to pop up and ask you if you want to create a user. You can select yes or no. So let's not do that. Let's just log in. Log in on the Android. Okay. So the first thing you can do is search for beers. One of the more popular ones is a Trappist beer in Belgium called Westmalle. So we'll search for that. And it's actually making a REST call out to a beer database. Well, okay, so it's making 2 REST calls here. First one is to OpenShift. And then my application actually makes another REST call out to a beer database to pull all this information back. So you can see all the beers that have Westmalle in it, the Trappist Triple. You can read a description about it, and you can drink it. So let's drink that beer. Yep. You could, And that's just a design decision that you'll have to make, right? And the reason I chose to use 2 REST calls, there's a couple different reasons. And not so much for this example, but a real world example you'd have to think about is sometimes if you're calling an external service, you have an API key and you're limited on what machines can connect to that REST API. So that would be one reason, not a very good one. The more important one is if you actually want to track the number of requests that are coming in for analytics. If you just make a call directly to another server, you lose all that visibility, so you don't know how many people are actually searching for beers in this case. Again, it's a bad example, but if it was a real app, you'd probably want those analytics in-house so you could do some reporting on them. So I drank the Westmall Trappist Triple, which is actually 11.5% alcohol. And I didn't know that until I had 7 of these a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, man, I can't even walk straight. And so there you go. So February 21st, I assume that's today, 2012, 9:02 p.m., which is Eastern time, which is where I'm from. So it's probably local time. Yep, on my machine, it's 9:03 now. So if you click on that, you can look some details. This is intentionally left blank right now. We'll come back in a few minutes and actually add geolocation to this and have a map API that we can see where we actually drink the beer. So let's go over to the Android app and look at our drink tab and make sure that it did show up. Yep, February 21st, 2012. So this doesn't look, that complicated, right? But the thing you have to think about is mobile development has completely changed over the last 2 or 3 years. It used to be single user-based applications. And now anything that's a mobile device, you want it to have a web presence as well and some type of social interaction some way or another on most cell phone apps, right? And so it's really changed for developers because we don't just have to focus on mobile development anymore. We then have to think about our back-end servers that are powering our mobile applications, which kind of sucks because the way people are making money on mobile apps is not one app making them $1 million. They'll have like 15 apps all making them $2,000 a year or whatever the case may be. It's multiples. And the problem with that is as developers, a lot of mobile apps are developed in our spare time, just something we want to play around with. The last thing we want to do when we get a mobile app out there is manage an entire infrastructure on the back end for one app, right? You'll spend half of your time after deployment just managing your infrastructure. And that's where platform as a service really makes life a lot easier for us as developers, as we can kind of offload that to someone else who knows that better than anyone, right? And focus more on development again. So there's also, like I said, a web component of this. So if I go to beer shift, my sorting's all screwed up. I need to fix it. It's just a bug. So we can see that this triple that we drank February 21st, 9:02, is on the web as well. Okay? So let's go back to the app. We then have a keg stand feature, which will allow you to see what anyone using the app is drinking, whenever. It's kind of like a fire hose type of what everybody's drinking. So that's the app, real quick. So this is all, the back end is all on OpenShift. It's all Mongo backed, and it is REST-based web services. So let me cheat here and cut and paste some URLs. So this is on the drink tab when we saw the beers that the OpenShift user used. This is what gets returned. It's just a JSON document. And if you're a Java developer and you love pain, you can get the XML version of this and parse it to your heart's content, right? This is actually a nice view when you're debugging and writing code because it's hard to visualize JSON documents as they're dumped on the screen, especially if you do, a search query. Like here's the Westmall search that I showed you. This is what gets passed down to the mobile phone every time. And if you're writing code, trying to make sense of this, trying to see if you have an element just right, it's kind of complicated to wrap your head around. So that's where you would pass in a different format, right? And actually make some sense of this. Oh, cool. I am using Chrome. I should get that extension. Okay, and then the fire hose. Just show that real quick. And there's also, just standard REST stuff. You can do format HTML if you want a rudimentary table to look at your data in the web browser as well. Okay, so let's actually look at the code here and see how this was all actually done. If you guys have questions at any time, just stop me. That wasn't me that drank it. I don't know. It was just some user, wasn't it? Cece. I don't know who Cece is. Sounds like a girl. Sounds like I would like to meet her. So, yeah, I don't know who that is. Never mind. All right. Yeah. My sorting's all screwed up. I need to fix that. It's the way I'm storing the date. It's pretty not a good way to be doing this, and I'll show you that in just a second, actually. So let's look at the code. So when you're developing apps, can you guys see this okay? In Titanium, they have this app.js file. So this entire application is written 100% in JavaScript. I did not know JavaScript when I started writing this application, and it was pretty easy to learn. I was never a front-end guy. I was always a back-end Java web services guy in my development career. So this app.js is kind of like the bootstrap file. It's what initially starts your application. It's the first file that gets loaded on the device, or not on the device because it gets compiled down to native, but you know what I mean there. So the first thing I do is the TI is just a shorthand for actually Titanium dot, which is their SDK. So I do ti.include. I include a date format JavaScript file, which allows me to have nice date formatable strings from dates like I'm used to in PHP and Java. There may be a better way to do it in JavaScript that I didn't know about, but I found this open source date format library, and I included it in my code. I then include two other JavaScript files that has some UI in it, and we'll get to that in a second. I then create a tab group. Let me actually start the application back up. So the tab group is what's down here at the bottom. And that's just the design that I decided to have. I could just have a window, right, and have custom buttons. You guys can't even see those down there too well. So you can think of it as a window and view is typically how these are laid out. And if you're familiar with HTML, it would be like a web page and a div, right? The window is your actual web page, and then a view is a div on the page, and you can have different elements inside of that. So I create a tab group here. It's just an empty placeholder for tabs at this point. I then define my API endpoint, I guess, or the starting of an endpoint. It's not the actual endpoint. beershift.openshift.com. We'll actually switch this out, create a new backend here in a few minutes, and start from scratch with that. I then set a property, API host, so I don't have to keep defining this again. And this actually gets compiled down to like a plist if you're familiar with Objective-C and iOS programming. It's just a lookup that you can do to store properties in your application that persists across application runs. So the first thing I do is I create the main drink window, and I specify absolute positioning based in pixels. There's a better way to do this. Especially on Android, you're not guaranteed exact screen resolution, so you wouldn't really want to do this if you wanted to have this app run on the iPad or an Android tablet, because they have different resolutions, obviously. But it'll scale, so you would do a layout type management at that point, and they have all of that built in as well. So the width is, the width and height in pixels. Top is how far down in pixels it's going to be from the top of the screen right here. I start at 0. Left is how far to indent it from left, and I just say 0 as well. Set a background color of black, and then I set a title of L when drink. And that's how you actually localize strings inside of Titanium. So if I go under en, there's a strings XML file, and it basically just, what was the name of it? Yeah, well, it's one of these in here. Beer shift, win drink right here. So I set the title, and that's what gets displayed up in the top right here. And actually, someone in Belgium, I was showing this to them, they submitted the German translations. Before that, it wasn't translated. So if you know a foreign language and you want to submit it, just check it out on GitHub and send me a pull request. Okay, so we set the title, and then I set a bar image, navbar.png, which overrides the default standard iPhone blue type navbar up at the top. I then create a view, which is our primary view. I basically set it to the same thing. I set a border radius, which gives it nice rounded corners. If I had a different background color than my view, you would be able to see that, but since they're both black, you don't actually see that. So if you're familiar with GUI programming, right, it's kind of a pain in the neck to put simple text on the screen, right? And so it's basically the same thing. You actually create a label. I set the width to auto, height to 30, which is pixels height of the label. Set the color, and then I can do CSS style properties on the font tag. Set the font size, and then I set the text, which was label beer name, which gets displayed right here. So as you can see, I'm coming down from the top 20 pixels to the left. There's a little indentation there, 10 pixels. So you have to have the text field. After you have the label, you add it to your view, or else it's not going to be visible. It's just an object floating around out there. Then I need to create a text field, which is nothing special, right? It's kind of the same thing. You give it a width, a height, a top, a right. You set a border style for it. Font, just like we did. And then what's interesting is you can do a couple of different things here. And so you could have a search button here, or you could just override the keyboard. And that's what I did. You can actually have this done button say search or return or whatever you want, right? And you would just pass that in. And then also you can provide a hint text, which is what gets displayed. If you can see that on the projector, yeah, it's actually grayed out on mine, but it'll, you know, give the user a hint on what they should be typing in there. So then, in traditional GUI fashion, you have to add an event list. So when they hit return on the keyboard, which is actually done right here, as I set it to done, but the event is return, I'm going to call populate table with beer. And that's where it kind of gets a little bit more interesting. So this populate table with beer is just a function that I included from the populate table with beer JS file. So if I look in that, I'll have a function called populate table with beer. I set a data array, set it to empty. I then create a table view, which is this view right here, and it's empty because the data array is empty. I give it a width and a height. I indent it down 55 pixels from the top. I specify my row height for each element in the table. And then I set my data to empty. Then I add it to the view, and it shows empty at that point. So now what I want to do is actually do a search. And so this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting. I create my endpoint by the API host that we stored as a property. We get that out, and then my endpoint is /beer/name/beer name, which is what we just showed in the browser when we searched for Westmall, and it dumped all that JSON data back. So in order to do that, I call titanium.network.createHTTP client, which is basically what starts my request. I then say it's going to be a GET request, because if you think about REST, right, it's just normal. GET is for, you know, retrieving data. POST is for adding new data. So like if you create a user, you do a POST request. Then I send my data. So typically when you have HTTP request, what do you get back? You get back a response. What's interesting, and it's almost like Node, is that it doesn't block waiting on that response. The code continues to execute at this point. And so I have to have a callback function that's going to get called when the response is brought back, and you store that on the onload, and I basically just create an anonymous function at this point. It's going to get called. I get the response back, and this is what makes Mongo and mobile development, especially with Titanium and JavaScript, so nice, is because typically, if I had a MySQL database, I would, get a result set in Java or whatever the case may be, iterate over it, populate some objects, return it back, get the objects, parse them back, blah, 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 serialize them, yada, 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 right? Unless you're using Hibernate or something or ORM, it makes life a little bit easier. But what's really nice is with Mongo, I can just throw the JSON straight in the database, the document storage, pull it out, shove it back, parse it, and I'm done, right? And it takes a lot of the complexity and a lot of the headaches away when you're developing databases. I'm a huge MySQL guy, Postgres, and I've even done a lot of Oracle stuff. And this is a breath of fresh air to me that I was able to do this so quickly without having to create 6 or 7 tables and crazy joins, and the list goes on and on and on. So I get the response back, I parse it out, I then iterate over it, and for each element that's returned, I'm going to create a table row. I call hasChild on it, and I set it to true. So let me search for something fancy here. Bud Light. So the hasChild true is what actually creates this little arrow here to let it know that that table row has a child window associated with it. I give it a class name, background color. I set the title to the response data, just iterating over it, just the name, description, and the name. That's the Android emulator going crazy. I don't know what it does. It's all the time garbage collecting or something. I have no idea. It's very chattery in the background. I set a description, and I get the brewery name that's returned. And the reason I just call element 0 because sometimes there are multiple breweries for a single beer, but I didn't really care, so I just chose the first one. And then, so that's setting up the row, but now I need to actually put something in the row. So I'm storing those data elements on the row itself. And the reason I do that is because that data is what's going to get passed to the child window. Now I need to create something that's visible to the user so they'll actually know what was returned. So I create a label. Similar to how we created a label on the previous screen. I just create a label, except this time I'm just adding that label to my table view or to the row. Because again, it's a view, it's just like a div if you're familiar with HTML. So you can add any element to any other element that can support that element in the container, right? So I basically just set the text to the beer name, and I add that row, and then I create an icon image, and I add that to the row as well, and then I add the row to the data array. And down at the bottom, I set the table of beers visible to false, so it can refresh. Then I set the data. I add an event listener for that row click, and then I set it back to visible to true. That's what's happening here. So not that much code, right? In Objective-C, this would have taken me forever to write. Okay, so back to our main file here. Have you guys seen enough of the JavaScript stuff? You want me to move over to the rest? Okay. All right, cool. We'll do that. So if we look at the web app, it is a PHP app. And I'll show you how that is all working. So I'm using CodeIgniter, which is a model view controller framework for PHP. And I have an API file. And it basically extends REST controller. And at this point, I can basically just say my noun and then the REST action, whether it's get, post, put, delete, whatever. So the user get is basically just going to check if username is set. If it's not, it's just going to return a 400. I'm going to lowercase the username. Then I'm going to call user model get user. So the same thing, post is creating, get a user's beer, get all the beers, and this is where I make that second REST call that I was talking about. So to search for beers, I load curl. I create a request passing in my key, my developer key, the query, the type, and if I want brewery to turn back or not. So I get that information back, I decode it, and then I send it back to the mobile app as well. So I don't store any of the beer information on my backend servers or on the mobile device. It's all living on this other system, and I just talk REST back and forth. Because that database is huge, right? I don't want to pay for all of that if someone else is going to pay for it. Okay, so the way I actually interact with Mongo here is I call my user model, and I load the MongoDB PHP library, and I actually, CodeIgniter has bindings for MongoDB, so I don't have to talk directly to it. So I can just do MongoDB get where. It's almost like Active Record in a sense, but it's not that advanced. So I can get where users array username equals username, and that's going to return it, right? To get a user's beer, I can limit to 50, and then I can do order bys, things that you would normally expect when you're interacting with your database. And I sort descending, nothing magical here. So let's actually, so create users the same. It's interesting here, actually, is that I load the encryption library and then promptly comment it out for some reason. I don't know. I don't know why that's in there. I guess I'm mucking around with it. So let's switch out the back end real quick. We'll create a new back end for this. We'll create a new Mongo database, and we'll get it all deployed out on Red Hat's cloud. Is the font okay? Can you guys see that? Okay. So, like I said, we have all these RHC commands. Let me make this screen fit here. So we have create app, create domain, control app, control domain, domain info, port forward, snapshot, tail files, and user info. It's a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go over it all. What I will go over is create app, control app, domain info, and tail files. Okay, so let's create a new app. So we'll do RHC create app. I'll give it a name of BeerShift 2. Pass in our language type. I'm going to do PHP 5.3. I'll authenticate. So what's actually happening here is it's making a call out to the OpenShift web services, and it is creating. You can think of it in these terms, even though this is not what's actually happening, but it's spinning up a new node for me. Even that's the easiest way to think of it. It's creating a new sandbox for me on a node. It's installing all of the required libraries that I need in order for my application to be supported. In this case, it's going to be Apache and ModPHP. It's going to make sure that those are installed, and it's going to segment those off for me. We actually use SE Linux and C groups in order to do this, which is another thing that differentiates us from some of the other providers. This is not a virtual machine. You are in a sandbox, but we use SE Linux and C groups to ensure that your processes has the compute power and that your application needs, right? So it's not like a virtual private server, which is typical in a lot of other environments. Of course, all this is running on EC2, so EC2 virtualizes everything. So at the host level, it is a virtualized instance. Okay. It also created a Git repository for us, and that's how we interact with OpenShift, is we use Git. And it created a DNS entry for us and propagated it out worldwide, and it should be available instantly. Yeah.
Is just creating a standard infrastructure that anybody would have, or is there a configuration file that goes, oh, we're going to use MongoDB, we're going to, enumerate a list of stuff that gets installed?
Yeah, because we passed in PHP 5.3, it's basically just installing the PHP 5.3 template that we have. It's going to put Apache and PHP and whatever else. It did not do any database stuff. Okay, it just created a shell of an application. So if I go out to...
So I have one more question.
Yeah.
Initially you said that it's free.
Yes.
OpenShift is free, but it's working on Amazon EC2. So I just pay for the Amazon instance.
You do not pay for Amazon. Red Hat is a nice company, and we give that to you for free. So we do pay for the back-end infrastructure on this. It is limited, though. You're not going to be able to set up like a 20-node Mongo cluster using this. We do only allow 5 applications or 5 databases running at one time, but we do pay for the back-end infrastructure as well. So there's absolutely no cost to use this. Yep.
Right now, is it free? Are their pricing plans in the
So
future?
we are in developer preview, and I'm not going to kid you guys and say Red Hat's not going to try to make money off of this. What we have said is that what I'm showing you today will continue to be free. So what you'll probably, and we're still working this out internally and what we're going to charge for, it'll probably be more around SLAs, or if you need, a certain amount of disk space or a certain amount of memory, something like that. But honestly, we're still working through that. So I don't know what to tell you other than what I'm showing you today will remain free. So I don't know. We just don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but they're free, so how they're going to make money?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about Red Hat, the way we make our money now on Red Hat Enterprise Linux is through support contracts, so that may be an angle to it if you want guaranteed uptime and an SLA, or you want to call somebody on the phone if you're having issues with your app, maybe. I just don't know. The only thing I can say is what I'm showing you will continue to be free, and we will be charging eventually for something.
Netflix on OpenShift. I suspect that we will be charging them money for that.
Yes. Yeah. So, like I said, you wouldn't deploy, and you can't today, like a 20-node cluster out on this. Five applications. So this is the stock app that's created. It's just a template. It's PHP application, and if I go into the directory, just real quick, we have a PHP directory. That is where you put your code. We have a dep list, which is where you put any modules that you want. Same with, we follow standard conventions if you're a Java developer. We support Maven, so if you have dependencies in your POM XML file, we'll pull those down, build them on the server. Same with Ruby and Python, just the standard way of how you include dependencies there. So let's go into the, let's actually pull the code down real quick, and I'm going to pull it down from my GitHub for the backend code here. So here's the source code for the web application, and I did provide some instructions here if you want to play around with this later on, basically going through everything I'm doing. So now that we have the application created, let's add Mongo support. So I'll cut and paste this to save time. Change my app name to Beershift 2. So RECCTL app is just control app. Basically, you pass in an app name and then some command that you want to do, -E for embed. I'm going to embed Mongo. You could do MySQL, Postgres, Jenkins, Rock Mongo, whatever you want to do. So I'm going to add Mongo 2.0 support. And it's basically doing the same thing that it did when it created the app, except now it's creating the database for me. It's actually going to create a default Mongo database based on my application name. It's going to give me the root user and password in order to authenticate to that database. So let's pull the source code down. And I'm going to git push this code. It's going to restart the app. And let's hit it in the web browser now. Why? Did I do something wrong there? Oh, yeah. That'll do it. That's good. I needed to update the real app anyway with changes. All right, so let's refresh this, and it's just an empty app at this point, right? So one of the cool things you can actually do with OpenShift is if I do RHC domain info and authenticate, it's going to list all of the applications that I have running. So Shipley is just my blog. BeerShift 2. So the get URL, it actually has our username in the URL. So I'm just going to cut and paste that. Trackpad challenged here. And I can SSH into my box. So here I am sitting on my node that my application is deployed to. So why would I want to do this? Because I want to use Mongo shell, right? So I can use Mongo, use BeerShift 2, db.users.find. We don't have anything. That's what we expected. So let's go back to the mobile app and change our backend services to BeerShift 2-onpaths.rhcloud.com. And I'll run this, and don't freak out that you didn't see me save it because I have it set to autosave when I launch the emulator. So here, let's go to settings. Let's create Chicago password of test. Log in. User doesn't exist. Let's create it. Let's go back. Make sure that that worked. And sure enough, it did. And also, sure enough, my password is in clear text. So I don't know why I commented that out. Who knows? So if you sign up and use this app for the time being, do not use one of your primary passwords of password, right? Okay. So we quickly switched that out. So what else did I say I was going to do? Okay, let's add geolocation real quick. So let me kill this. Well, let's drink a beer real quick so we can have something in the database. Make sure that worked. Okay, so we got a beer. Let's kill this. Let's go back to our code. And I'm going to cheat in the interest of time, and I wrote this code earlier, but I'll walk you through what it's actually doing. And I'm going to paste it in real quick here. So I'm doing two things here. I'm creating an annotation, and I'm creating the actual map. So for the beer annotation, first thing you'll call me BS on is that I'm hard coding the latitude and longitude. Why am I doing that? Because I don't have GPS on my laptop, right? Now, if I was actually deploying this, there is a quick API call. It's just ti.geolocation.getCurrentLocation, and that returns an object back with everything you want, like the heading, longitude, latitude. And I would just parse that out. So if you are going to do that, one thing I would suggest is to almost have like a application property for your current location and have a set interval function call that actually updates that every 5 minutes or so. Otherwise, when you call getCurrentLocation, it actually takes a little bit for your device to return that sometimes, and you don't want your app to be blocked on that. So if you just update it in the background every so often, it'll always be available to you. So that's what I would do in that situation. So I'm creating an annotation, which is basically a pinpoint on a map. I'm setting the title and the subtitle. I'm giving the pin color a pin color of red, and I'm going to animate it in, set that to true. Then I create a map view. Same thing we talked about earlier. I'm going to indent down 110 pixels. It's going to be 350 pixels. It's a standard map. You know, longitude and latitude again, animated in. I'm going to default to my current location, and I'm going to load in my annotations. In this case, I'm just doing one. But what you'd typically do for every beer that a user's drank, I would create an annotation for that beer and have the pinpoints on the map. But you know, we just did one here. So let's run this, and we'll see the end results here. So good. We drank a beer. Let's drink another one real quick. Let's do Bud what? Bud Light Lime. Let's drink that. Okay, and I got a refresh bug too right now, but that's cool. So if we look at Bud Light, now we can see this is where we're at because I stole those coordinates on Google Maps. And here's the annotation that got dropped in. Did you see it like animate in? That's the animate true. Otherwise, it would have just been there when we started the app. And if I click on it, we have the title and the description, right, which is what we said. So if we go back and look at the other one, you can see that the description changes. That's Bud Light. I don't know what we just looked at. And then Bud Light line. So you'd actually create a bunch of different annotations for whatever your use case is, whether it's users, if you're doing some social, find a, who's drinking where, whatever the case may be, you would use it for that. And so this is portable again, and I would show it to you on Android, but in order to have the mapping components on Android, I have to download a specific Android version of the, or map enabled Google API version of the Android SDK, and I just didn't have time to do it today to show that, but because I'm just using the stock Android API, but to take advantage of like Google Maps, you need to load in their API extensions. Okay, so that is basically what I wanted to show you guys tonight. So again, if this works, let's see here. It is free, as in beer. It is not open source yet. Stay tuned. We have some exciting news over the next couple of months that if you're looking for an open source platform as a service to check back often with us. It is something as a company we try hard to do, is to make everything we do open source. And a lot of people ask why we're not yet. That's because we got some of this technology through an acquisition a couple of months ago, and so we're going through all of that right now. So again, sign up, OpenShift, completely free. You can play around with your Mongo instances, whatever you want to do there. Shy MongoDB if you want something free at the end. If you have questions about OpenShift, we are always on Freenode and pound OpenShift. We have forums when you start playing around with it. If you have questions, you can email openshift@redhat.com. Our Twitter is @OpenShift, and the source code for everything I showed you tonight is github.com/gshipley. If you want to fork it, do your own thing, feel free. It's a BSD license, or if you want to add stuff to it, that'll, eventually get to the App Store once I get around to accepting the request and publishing a new binary out. You can do that as well if you just want to say that you have something in the App Store on your resume for whatever reason, right? So again, thanks for letting me come and speak tonight. Had fun. If you had any questions, I'll be around. Just hit me up afterwards. Thanks, guys.